Good morning.
Hello.
Good morning. Trust everyone is having a lovely day. So let's get started. I want to talk about one of the issues that I was working on. This is an epic where we're trying to address the IP address space for all of our node pools inside of our production zonal clusters because they were not sized very well. And one of our goals with this was to have the ability to recreate a cluster without any issues. So one of my issues was trying to determine the saturation level for all of our components, right? And I rolled through this issue and identified 3 areas which were important. So I'm going to go through these out of order. I don't know what alerts need to be silenced. In fact, if you go into our alert system and you create a silence for anything coming from a specific zone, so let's say we say create a alert that just excludes everything from zone C, just as a random example, what ends up happening is that we end up triggering an alert, which is kind of the opposite effect. So I think our only way to accomplish, trying to figure out what alerts that we're going to run into is to practice this in staging. So I've already got an issue to, perform the practicing procedure. What I need to do is add the fact that we need to keep track of what alerts trigger and figure out a good silence mechanism that is broad enough to cover a cluster being down, but not so broad that it ends up triggering the alert. And for historical context, the reason why that alert triggers is because we are relying on a dead man's snitch to ensure that what is supposed to alert us is still there. So if you create the silence, you prevent dead man's snitch from learning that that system is online. So that's a reasonable expectation. It's just kind of unfortunate it's built that way. So yeah, staging. I'll be practicing.
Will we additionally have other alerts that potentially fire due to the fact that we'll expect increased traffic on the other clusters as well?
No, we should not. In fact, the only alerts that I'm expecting to trigger is anything related to our monitoring stack that might be installed into a cluster, because those components will effectively will either not be able to scrape, or they will not be reporting themselves upward to like Thanos, where all those metrics get gathered and stored. The other alerts I'm expecting are from the cluster that we're taking out, specifically traffic cessation alerts. And that's just because traffic will be removed from that cluster. When I went through trying to identify all the saturation levels, we've done a pretty good job with our HPAs such that they'll scale up normally. And I'll touch a little bit on this a little bit, but we should be okay with adding additional load. So I'll touch back on that a little bit more in a second.
Did we, sorry, I have a question, John.
Yeah.
Did we have any issue in the past where something similar happened and we had like a overload of alerts?
The only time I can think of where that might have happened is when we had some sort of zonal situation, but I would have to go back and search through our incidents.
Okay.
And that was such a long time ago. I'm not actually sure what I would search for.
No, it's okay.
I'll at least make an attempt though, because
Okay.
and I recall one of our zones having an issue. I think it was networking related. But I don't recall like where that problem lied and what the trigger for that was and what the result of that outage or incident was either. So
thank you.
The other thing that I had identified was that our Git HTTP node pool that handles all our web service Git traffic, that was dangerously close to saturation today. So like we were running at near 100% saturation during our peak workload times today. So, well, prior to today, I started working on this and I knocked out this issue. So the issue I fired up to address this is now closed. Our saturation level was, I think, at 86% this morning. It's now down to 12%. So I'm super excited about that. So with 12% saturation across all three clusters, we should be close to, if I'm doing the rough math in my head correctly, about 25% saturation across two clusters. When the cluster gets, when the Git HTTP pool gets removed in one of the clusters. So I'm very excited about that. There is a tracking issue that opened up because Tamland was detecting that this was a problem as well. Currently, its trend line looks a little goofy. So I'm waiting till next week when that gets rerun to see what that looks like, but we should be okay on that front. And lastly was the one that I really want to talk about right now is what happens because Canary might take too much traffic. And this goes back to a little bit of historical context where when the way that our HA proxies are configured, we set the weight values on two clusters. The cluster that is inside of the same zone that that HA proxy node is in, and then Canary, which is a regional cluster. So our production clusters are normally set to a weight of 100, whereas Canary is set to a weight of 5. This provides roughly 4.76% of the traffic is going to land on the Canary cluster. If we mark one of those clusters as in maintenance period or in sort of maintenance or drain state, Canary will start to take 100% of that traffic for any HA proxy node that's in that same zone. That's a very dangerous situation. And while for the most part, we should be able to accept that amount of traffic in Canary, I don't want to risk it because Canary serves a very specific purpose. One, it's meant to only take a very small piece of traffic for the purposes of testing auto deploy. And if we want to rely on QA being relatively successful, I don't want to sit here in a situation where Canary is taking 100% of the traffic in one zone, but is only taking 5% of the rest. That just doesn't make sense. It's introducing a very awkward consistency situation that is going to make for an interesting headache that I don't want to have. So I've got some ideas. I'll start sharing my screen again because I created an issue. I just haven't really fleshed everything out just yet. I want to introduce a set of tooling improvements. This is just a kind of proposal. So one of these is that we have a set server state script that allows us to set the state of backends in HA proxy. This was used more when we were not in Kubernetes, but the tool still exists. My thoughts behind this is that we would kind of expand this to do a few things. I hate it when I spot typos. So one would be to let's try to shut down backends in a specific zone. So instead of asking HA proxy to shut down cluster C across all HA proxies, target only the HA proxies that live in zone C and shut down the cluster for zone C. What that should enable us to do is preventing the situation where I guess I'm going out of order, but that should prevent a situation where all the traffic ends up in Canary because we've shut down the traffic for just that zone. We would also do the same for Canary in that particular case. That way the Canary doesn't blow up. The other improvement I would like to try to introduce is to make these changes slowly. Right now, this script operates against pretty much all the FE nodes all at the same time. And that's going to be kind of dangerous because with 1/3 of all traffic, or, in certain like web requests, we're getting 93 million requests per 15 minutes. that's going to be problematic because that load is going to shift to the other two clusters very abruptly, and they may struggle for the first 5 minutes while the HPAs start to ramp up and scale the pods as necessary. So I'm thinking of adding some sort of sleep in some way, shape, or form that enables that traffic to slowly get rotated, whether that be touching a single server, sleeping for a few seconds and going to touch the next server. I'm not sure how to implement that just yet, but it is something I want to look into. And then lastly, this is one that needs to be evaluated, is just like what state should those backends be that also enables auto deploy to work okay. Right now, if I recall correctly, and this again is something I need to research. If I recall correctly, HA proxy is stood up in a way where it's checking for the status of our servers, and if it's in an up state, auto deploy is happy, the prepare job is happy and allows the deploy to continue. If a service is in down state, auto deploy would be like, something's wrong, look at this, I'm going to fail. That way the deploy does not continue. If we put them in maintenance state, if I remember correctly, the prepare job is okay with that, but that's something I need to recheck because I can't remember off the top of my head what that looks like.
I remember it to be the same, Scubback.
Okay, so alongside that, the other thing I want to make sure is that the load balancing works okay in that situation because of our waiting and our backup configurations instead of HA proxy. Meaning, because we have, say I'm operating in zone C again, zones B and D will be marked as backup servers, backup endpoints, so they don't see traffic for the most part ever from a zone C HA proxy. I want to make sure that load balancing still operates as we expect it to when we start tearing things down for a given cluster, given the state that they're in. And this is just a quirk inside of HA proxy that I want to validate that we're not going to see anything that's surprising. That's all. Outside of that, outside of these tooling improvements that I'm proposing, the next step as far in regards to this particular epic is actually starting the testing and staging. Let's tear down a cluster and staging and rebuild and see where we are. I think the only other things I have listed under this epic are the tooling updating that I just proposed, performing the testing and staging, and then some future items. So like, trying to figure out what to do with network spaces and Kubernetes overall, which I don't feel like we need to address now. It's going to be something that we need to do when we're ready to execute in production. That way we can rebuild clusters as necessary. I think that's a precursor to actually formalizing what that end goal looks like. And then also creating saturation alerts for the networking space, which I don't think we have. Tamland is doing that, but we don't have alerting for it. And maybe Tamland is sufficient. I don't know. Because those are something that gets evaluated over time, and we get like we know what the course looks like and we know what we're going to start running out ahead of time. So it enables us to kind of handle it in a more graceful situation like we are doing today. That way we're not in an emergency situation. So I may just close that particular issue. So, but I'll try to look into refining it if necessary. So I guess that's all I've got for this. Does anyone have any questions?
So I have a question. After the work you're doing now with the Git HTTP node pools and so on, I guess our IP space saturation is lower than before.
Yes, I'm not going to have the Tamland report for that until next week when Tamland runs. Because if I recall correctly, it runs on a Tuesday. But like just to showcase the work so far, like this was prior to the Git nodes.
Yeah.
This is back from last week, but like, we were on an upward trend. And if I recall, we were going to hit 70% saturation by July. And I didn't mark it here, but like we were on target for being fully saturated come August, September-ish. But now that we've done all the node pools except the one I just fixed today, this looks wonderful. Like it's still going down. In fact, I'm kind of curious as to what that looks like now.
Yeah.
Now that
good job there.
a week has passed and Okay, so like there is no forecast at hitting neither our 100% or 80%, which is fantastic. And you see where the dots are now down to like 40-ish, upwards of 50% during load time. So that's fantastic. And this will come down even further next week when Tamlane runs, now that the Git node pools run. So I'm very happy about this.
It's a very good result. Yes. Thank you, John. Do you think we can have a little demo in the next week to see which is our saturation level after Tamland runs?
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
What was that issue you just were showing us before, Scarbet? The one you talked through the alerts on?
Oh, I'll link it to the
Could you
tooling
just drop it?
improvement.
Yeah. Could you just drop it on the agenda?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Will do.
One question I have for you is, when we take this cluster out in staging, do we need to stop deployments?
Good question. So here's my thought on that, and here's what I plan to do to address this. With the HA proxy tooling improvements, my goal with this is that Canary is still usable, and auto deploy is smart enough to skip deploying to a cluster that might be undergoing maintenance, which that is a separate issue that I need to still create, which that's a good reminder. Because I need to figure out what to do with auto deploys during cluster outages.
Because we have a
So
way
I'll
to
get
skip
initiative
it,
for
right?
that.
Like, so we have the allow it's called something like k8s allow failure flag that will not attempt to deploy to that cluster.
If
I can dig that
what
for
does
you.
that flag do?
It skips a cluster.
That doesn't sound right.
Yeah, we talked about it quite a lot because it was like, oh, it sounds largely bad, but except for the case where you have a deliberate time like this where you actually don't want to attempt to deploy to a known cluster. So we do have a way of skipping it, but what I was going to actually ask as a follow-up is, assuming we have a way to keep deployments running, how does this cluster end up back in sync? Does we have to do a deployment at like the end of this work to get that cluster back onto the right version?
Yep. So part of my procedure when we do this in staging is going to add a step that indicates how to perform a true up after the fact. So, auto deploy does this automatically, but if a cluster gets skipped or if we rebuild the cluster, it's not going to have GitLab deployed to at all, or it's going to have their own version.
Yeah.
We have the ability to do this locally. Our tooling operates or can talk to our clusters outside of CI. So the steps would be, do whatever is necessary to rebuild the cluster. After it's up, healthy, ready to go, perform a step, which is just running the K control command like we do in CI, but we do this locally, and we're just pointed to the newly created or whatever cluster went under maintenance.
Great, sounds good.
Any other questions? Okay. Akma, do you want to talk about camo proxy? Because we've been making some slow progress on it.
Thank you. So camo proxy is on production, already out the door, and we are not accepting any traffic yet. I was checking today the change request to accept traffic, and there is a point, we can basically discuss this point. It says preferably best case scenario is to actually execute this CR on weekends. So I'm not sure if we actually want to do this. So part of this is due to invalidating the cache of the markdown. So this will basically have a huge write on database. So this is part of it, is to execute it during a weekend. And the other thing is basically like if we have any issue, we can roll back safely. So like, what do you think? Like, should we actually execute it on a weekend, or is it safe to execute it, I don't know, like Monday? Because I was thinking actually if we are going to execute it, is to execute it before my duty as a release manager, which is coming after next week.
So what's the, how long does the impact last? Do we have a sort of rough idea once we invalidate the cache?
Hours to days, unfortunately.
Right, okay.
So like part of the problem is basically just the previous markdown that has the old common proxy from VMs is to have the new common proxy from Kubernetes. So this is why it's gonna take some time to basically update all of these images. Although we take a very low traffic for common proxy because we serve only external images. So as it says here, 10 to 20 requests to common proxy. So it's not a huge load on its own. So
I feel like the RPS is low enough that this shouldn't be too strenuous on our infrastructure. So I think if we have a concern with this, I hesitate to do this on the weekend just because that's thoroughly against GitLab values. But we do have the personnel available where we could schedule this during the lower period of traffic. So I try to encourage it to have this happen either during the APAC time zone or maybe as early as possible during your working hours is
Okay.
kind of my thought at this moment. I think if we had a better understanding as to what that impact may be, we could probably readjust, but I don't know how we would discover what that impact could be. I don't know what kind of mechanism we would use to determine whether or not our database system is going to crumble under this. But being that the request rate is like, 20 per second, it's tiny.
Mm-hmm.
That's nothing. We serve 90 something million web requests per 15 minutes. I feel like this is not going to change very much.
Can we invalidate on a cluster by cluster basis, or is it just, it's everything?
I think it's everything, yeah.
Yeah, it's everything because we're switching which architecture is serving this content.
So all the clusters just go in one go. That's a shame.
Effectively, we're turning the cluster valid, or the cache mechanism is being revoked because the infrastructure is currently in virtual machines.
And the impact is potentially the database. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah. We are basically gonna update one version. Like it's currently 6 on the one of the column on the database, the markdown. I don't know what column is it, but like from 6, it's gonna be like updated to 7, which is gonna invalidate all of the markdown rows on the database. So I think this is why potentially it's gonna have like some impact.
How fast is gonna be the rollback in the case we see problems?
It says 10 minutes, but I'm not sure if it's gonna, how long it's gonna last, to be honest.
It wouldn't help for this though, right? Would it? Like, because isn't the problem with validating the cache rather than camo?
There's no rollback for that.
Yeah, so I don't think the risk is like camo. I think camo is probably going to be fine. It's how long will the cache take to rebuild? Unknown. Let's just wait it out if we do it.
So what if we did this on, oh no, that wouldn't work. Never mind. My apologies.
Don't do it on Monday because I think we're doing this database stuff at the weekend and we will give someone a heart attack if we throw up a database problem on a Monday morning. But perhaps like Oh,
I'm thinking Friday.
yeah, it's family and friends, but be super quiet.
Not
Are you
this
thinking
Friday.
this Friday? Are you thinking going ahead? Oh, we could do. I was thinking next week, but yeah, keep going next week, I guess. I guess it's so the question is, if we have no way of testing this to know how long the impact is, we're going to have to do a best guess. There's no rollback, so we'd have to just wait it out. I guess, like, in the event this is horrible and it's much worse than we expect, is there anything we'd be able to do?
Well, so hypothetically, GitLab.com will survive if Camera Proxy is gone. This was done as a cost-effective saving measure for reducing the amount of network calls that we need to make outbound in order to serve content for both ourselves as well as client side having to reach out to a third party. So realistically, I don't think this is going to be like what we're updating in the database should be quick because it's just modifying a URL, right?
Yeah.
So Graham is also out on Friday, so that's not going to work in terms of doing it across APAC.
I would try to, Akmad, if able, I would try to do it as early as you can Friday for you, if possible.
I'm out on Friday, but I can basically
Okay.
I can
So,
also
yeah,
I can be present to execute this.
Let's do it on a day you're around, just in case something comes up later on, or it drags out and you get caught up. So don't do Friday.
Could maybe also potentially do this late my day.
That was the other thing I was thinking. If you did it late Friday, because I think we must be upsetting all the caches anyway over the weekend as we are doing maintenance.
Yeah.
So it may not be bad to drop this like right before. Unless potentially we're making any change that affects the plans for the CI decomposition.
Yeah, the only thing that would interrupt me is the fact that I'm release manager, and this Friday is the 17th. So I don't think we'll be doing anything release management task related because that stuff starts on the 16th.
Yeah, you have a little bit, but it hopefully isn't going to be anything too unusual. Yeah.
So let's go ahead and schedule this work for Friday, meaning, this week. I could try to accomplish it. And in the meantime, leading up to this, I'll try to see if there's any way we could try to measure what that potential impact will be. I'll do some research and see if I can't figure anything out. And if I do discover something, either I'll delay or reach out and try to meet up so that everyone understands what that is. If I don't find anything, we'll just continue on like we kind of planned in this meeting.
Yep.
I don't like the fact that we don't know how to test this, but I think because Camera Proxy is not officially like an integration like built inside of our product, it kind of makes it hard.
Yeah.
This is
hang on, didn't Craig Miskell put this in?
Yes.
I wonder how he put it in. Maybe he has some tips.
I'll reach out to him.
Because at some point, presumably, we've done the opposite of this, right? So, or something similar to this, right? To get this cache in.
Potentially, yeah.
If we don't manage to go on Friday, like I would suggest, like maybe next Thursday could be another opportunity. In your time, Ahmad. Graham should be around. We'll be post-release, so that might be another good day.
Sure.
Is this gonna be a C2 change request?
It's C3 actually.
Even if we are possibly impacting the database?
We're not making. Ooh, maybe it should be a C2 because we are. I don't have the change request in front of me, but aren't the invalidation? Yeah, the invalidation sounds like it should be a C2.
Yeah, I would go higher just because it gives you one extra step for get an approval, but like we'll approve that, right? Like, but I think if in terms of it giving people a suitable potential heads up makes sense.
Yeah. One thing also, I'm gonna update some things a bit related to it, the template for the change request. since C1 and C2 they don't report is GitLab production calendar. So I'm gonna add an extra check there. I'm gonna submit an AMER in a few minutes.
Where did this process come from?
From the change management one in our handbook.
Okay, because the calendar is very empty. I mean, maybe it's because it's
No,
not
no,
on the CR
there is a-
template.
There is the birthday. There's a birthday of someone in the calendar.
Good, good.
But we change the process, or we adopt the CR template.
Yeah.
Because otherwise we are kind of inconsistent there.
Exactly, yeah.
Thank you, Scarback, actually, for taking this. Either you or me like gonna execute it, so finger crossed.
We'll aim for this Friday. If not, you revisit again.
Sure.
Nice one.
Any
Well done
further
for getting to that
questions?
stage.
Oh. I think this will excite Vlad when he gets back and he's like, oh, it's done? Cool.
Yeah, like that. Just take some time off. We got this. Yeah, it's great to get to this point. So one thing that actually, once we do get this rolled out, we need to figure out an answer to is what we do with the deny list, because I know it's a little bit of a question mark. What I'm actually wondering is if we even need to do something with the deny list, because it's never been used. And I wonder if there is any SRE on call who knows it exists, because if they don't know it exists, they're never going to use it, in which case it probably doesn't matter if it works. So it might be worth us actually like checking in with, you know, Java or, you know, reliability basically, and actually, is this something, do they want to have deny list capabilities here, or do we always just default to Cloudflare and then that's it?
All right. So
Okay.
do we have any other questions or comments?
For you, Scarback, I've added on 1i this issue 2253 where we talked quite extensively about this flag, and do we pull it out or do we keep it? But the reason we kept it is almost exactly this scenario you're going to need of, I possibly want to keep deploying, but I know I don't have the full set of clusters.
Yeah, so this flag is for the entire pipeline specific to all of the GitLab COM deployment. And I really don't want to impact that because I want to make sure that if a failure does occur in another cluster, like maybe it's overloaded, and so a deploy is like struggling on a cluster, I want to make that well aware. And if we hide this with this flag, we're preventing the release manager from discovering some sort of failure. So my initial thought was, let's create some sort of new environment variable. And then during the CI pipeline creation, it knows I'm cluster C, I'm going to be skipped, allow failure is true for me for this particular build or something to that effect. But I'll get an issue created because I should have created one by now to figure out what to do with that. And this, I'll link to this as this is certainly an option, but I think it's too broad to be a sane option in my opinion.
Oh, okay, sounds good.
Cool. Michaela, is there anything that we want to discuss related to GitLab SSHD? We're kind of on hold at the moment, so I didn't know if there's anything that we wanted to discuss in here at all.
I can give an update. So the rollout of the proxy functionality is on hold because of the blocker that I identified. The blocker was that we would introduce a regression in the case we're going to release that. So there is a new feature coming in to avoid that a subset of customers gonna have this regression in. And the change request that I ping you in the channel today is to fill the data after the merge request is in production and the migrations are run, to fill the data in this new attribute coming in. So After that, I guess we will have a new updated date to run the change request for production enablement of the proxy functionality. But so far that one is on hold. I asked the team, the source team also to provide us a full script tested that we can run as part of the CR. So we are just mere executor there, and because we are not the domain expert in that side. And I would suggest also maybe tomorrow when we execute that to do it in a joint call as well with them.
So the script is not ready yet.
I got a ping right now from Sean. As soon as I finish this call, I'm gonna check the ping. I guess it's the script, and I'm gonna let you know.
Okay, thank you.
That's excellent. Okay. Anything else? Otherwise, I think we could adjourn.
Thank you.
Excellent. Well, you all have a lovely Wednesday.
You
See you
too.
later.
You too.
Bye.
Take care.